Chapter 588. Madame Halder and Ghost Eye sat on the workbench in the shipyard. It was as if they were talking in riddles, or as if they were old friends exchanging greetings. They did not exchange many words, and then with smiles on their faces they walked away, one going up the other going down, and did not meet again. Yinlu followed behind Madame Halder. Aside from the initial greeting, she didn't say a word. She only knew that the two of them were talking about last night's drill in the abyss area, but she couldn't guess the specifics. But what she could be sure of was that Madame Halder and Ghost Eye must have reached some sort of tacit understanding. Otherwise, why would they have to create a coincidental encounter in this military base for others to see when and where they could talk about such gossip? Yinlu lowered her eyes. A month ago she was only one of the two deputy officiants in the order. But now that the traitor Ren Hong was dead, she was undoubtedly the first in line to inherit the position of officiant. Her position in the order had risen to an unprecedented height. But when did Madame Halder and Ghost Eye get in touch? The two of them had such a close friendship, but no matter what kind of difficult situation they were in, Madame Halder never revealed anything. Why was that? Yinlu had a subtle feeling in her heart, but no matter what, the benefits were immediate. No matter how dire the blood flame order was, having an extraordinaire appear and communicate with them in a friendly manner was an excellent card to play. The guiding personnel of the military were dumbfounded at this moment. To him, this was undoubtedly a very important piece of information. And when this information was sent to the military decision-makers, it would probably boost the blood flame order, which was currently in a rather passive position in D-City. Yinlu pondered over this in her heart, but since Madame Halder didn't say anything, she couldn't ask. A minute later, Ghost Eye, who had finished circling around the white bone mound, did not even say goodbye and just left. She finally calmed down and carefully observed the white bone hill that was right in front of her. In fact, the higher-ups of the Blood Flame Order had already analyzed the white bone mound from all sorts of images and information. This time they were seeing the real thing in person to verify their previous analysis. Yinlu soon confirmed that 99% of the white bone hill structure was based on the Blood Soul Temple. As for the remaining 10%, it was just a deviation caused by the impact of the energy. Most importantly, even though it had been half a month, he could still vaguely feel the special spiritual waves radiating from it. Outsiders wouldn't be able to guess, but as the deputy officiant, Yinlu could tell at a glance that during the process of shaping the white bone hill, there had been an astonishing energy exchange. Within the church, this energy exchange was also called blood sacrifice. How could such a thing in such a form appear in the sea where Jin Tong disappeared or died? Could it be that it was really as some people had guessed, that the one who had already died in battle at the Aurora Cloud capital had revived using a secret technique? Yinlu did not voice out such a taboo guess. She remained silent until Mrs. Halder signaled for them to leave. Under the more cautious and respectful welcome of the military guides, the two of them got back into the MPV and drove out of the factory. In the car, Madame Halder had been resting with her eyes closed, or perhaps she was deep in thought. Only when they reached the highway did she open her eyes and speak. Luonan wants to kill someone. Yinlu was suddenly stupefied. Her thoughts had been swaying between the White Bone Hill and Ghost Eye. She hadn't thought of Teacher Luo, whose name had already shaken the world even though he hadn't reached adulthood. He was a bit stupefied for a time. Luckily, she quickly came to her senses. Madame Halder and Ghost Eye had mentioned the drill in the Abyss region earlier. Luonan was the core character. But the matter of killing someone. Madam, who do you think Luonan wants to kill? Madame Halder took off her kid leather gloves and placed them on the armrest of her seat. Her right hand, which had just caressed the back of Ghost Eye's neck, opened and closed twice. She spoke a few seconds later. According to Ghost Eye's explanation, Luonan is using the drill in name to familiarize himself with the attack patterns of the Abyss region. In reality, he's using Ghost Eye as a simulated target. Since he's using Ghost Eye as a simulated target, it's very likely that the target is a mental type extraordinary. Yinlu was speechless. She said after a while, even if he's practiced 100 or 1,000 times, he'll still kill extraordinaries as he pleases. Her voice suddenly cut off. Yinlu thought of Jin Tong at this moment. Madame Halder's gaze stared at her own right hand. She muttered, Ghost Eye means that he can faintly sense a certain hidden threat. Perhaps that threat is Luonan's trump card in beheading Jin Tong. But Jin Tong is a fleshly type after all. It's very hard to completely imitate his previous experience. That's why he needs Ghost Eye as a live target. There are only 30 or 40 mental type extraordinaries under the heavens. Who could it be? Inla didn't speak. She was still digesting Halder's judgment. Even though the logic was complete, it was still very hard for her to completely agree with it. Madame Halder didn't dwell too much on this matter. She most likely wanted to gather more information before making a judgment. However, she made a decision. Notify Sky General Entertainment. Let's shelve the negotiations over Mingtang Culture's acquisition. Madam? According to Multifaceted's explanation, Luo Nan and Mingtang Culture have quite a deep connection. We need to have a channel to facilitate contact. Yin Lu responded with a yes, and immediately made a call to the negotiating side. She didn't care how astonished and angry the other side was. The matter was settled in less than a minute. When the call ended, Yin Lu was just about to ask for instructions when Madame Halder took the initiative to ask her, "What do you think about Ghost Eye?" Yin Lu was a bit startled. She didn't know what to say for a time. She simply shook her head. "I haven't studied him in depth before. I don't dare to make a rash judgment." Madame Halder laughed soundlessly. She didn't bicker with Yin Lu. She continued, "Ghost Eye seems to be frivolous, but he has everything an extraordinary should have. His judgment far surpasses that of a normal person. That's fine. When it comes to extraordinary cultivation, he's far more curious than the vast majority of extraordinaries. Correspondingly, he doesn't pay much attention to mundane matters. You need to remember this." Yin Li's heartbeat increased by a notch. There was no doubt that Madame Halder was deciphering the mysteries of Ghost Eye's relationship with her. To the Blood Flame Order, which lacked a core of extraordinaries and a sacrificial artifact to suppress them, this was an extremely important resource. Regardless of whether it was sooner or later, if she could learn the truth, it meant that Yin Li's position within the Order and in Madame Halder's heart had been further solidified. Yin Lu felt as if she had returned to the time when she received the Order's fundamental secret technique. She listened attentively to Madame Halder's every word and committed them to memory. There wasn't much information regarding Ghost Eye. It was nothing more than contact information, communication skills, personality analysis, and so on. Madame Halder only took 2 minutes to finish explaining everything. In the end, she sighed with emotion. Ghost Eye is the kind of person whose curiosity is greater than his ambition. He likes to meddle in other people's business and care about old relationships. Out of all the extraordinaries, he's practically the most suitable to befriend and rely on. It's just that the more favors are used, the thinner they are. In recent years I've needed him, but he hasn't needed me. Our friendship of 20 years can only withstand 2 or 3 troubles. If it goes any further, it'll most likely not last. Yin Lu consoled. If we can get past this hurdle, the Order will be promoted and our status will be close. Perhaps, don't say these meaningless words. Madame Halder waved her hand. Rather than thinking about these useless things, it's better to think about how to clean up the loose ends in Xia City and open up the situation in T City. Yin Lu choked up. She responded with a soft, yes. She couldn't continue for a time. The difficulties faced by the church after the relocation of their foundation had far exceeded their worst expectations. It had to be said that T City was an important city in the Pacific Ocean. Although it was far away from the major economic circles and was isolated overseas, it and Chan City were like horns to each other. They faced each other from a distance and just so happened to be 2 important strategic strongholds protecting the deep blue world. It was also one of the core offices of the current world government. The strategic location was admittedly good, but it was also a place where wind, clouds, dragons, and tigers converged. The government, the military, the capital, and the powers of the inner world intersected. For an outsider like the Blood Flame Order, it was far too difficult to take root there. Madame Halder had always viewed T City as an important backup base for the past decade or so. She had transferred many industries there and had a legal and reliable identity. But this could only guarantee their ability to survive in normal society. In the inner world, where power and foundation were valued, the Blood Flame Order was a secret order. Their foundation of believers was in a half-collapsed state. They were like rootless duckweed. If this was all, they could still immerse themselves in business and slowly plan. But they never expected that at this critical time, Chan City, which was supposed to be the most stable, would stir up trouble. The impact spread to T City as well. Gradually there was chaos. Yin Lu understood that under these complicated circumstances, Madame Halder had put down the multitudes of affairs in T-City and returned to Xia City. Aside from dealing with the loose ends of moving out of Xia City, there was also a large part of it. Madame Halder saw that the situation in T-City was difficult and hoped to find some external power that she could borrow. Right now Madame Halder had found Ghost Eye, but this wasn't enough. Several minutes of oppressive silence persisted in the commercial vehicle until news from the outside came in. Yin Lu received the latest intelligence from the Pacific Ocean. Calling it intelligence was a bit of a stretch. The news had just been released when it became the most explosive news in the inner world. The Ability User Headquarters and the Order of Justice have put aside their negotiations, but they immediately announced the news of a new plane to the outside world. Confirmed? What's the specific location? Yin Lu felt a bit bitter in her mouth. Confirmed, but there's no specific location. We only suspect that it might be a subsidiary plane of the Deep Blue World. Madame Halder was silent. Yin Lu paused. In the end she couldn't help but speak again. T-City is definitely within the exploration radius. According to the official exploration principles, the recruitment of personnel is imperative. There's also the expulsion and counterattack of the mutant species. Madam, our manpower and reserves can't afford to be tossed about. Chapter 589. Tomorrow was the winter solstice. It was the time of year when the night was the longest. The weather in Xia City hadn't been too good for some time now. At 5 o'clock in the evening the sky had clearly darkened. Shadows flickered in the depths of the jungle on the north bank. Add to that the sharp or coarse caws of the resident birds. Those who were a bit less courageous might not have the guts to walk on the forest paths. However, inside the gear building in the jungle, the public activity area on the second floor of the basement was brightly lit. Due to the lighting, the side of the waterway near the sandbar attracted quite a few fish and shrimps from the bottom of the lake. They stuck close to the glass wall and bumped into each other. As for whether it was interesting or strange, that would depend on the aesthetic of each person. None of the people who stayed here paid attention to this scenery. They sat around the bar counter laughing and joking. The atmosphere was lively. Aha, serves you right. Xuelei drank a bit of alcohol. Since he wasn't of legal drinking age, he lacked experience in this area. It was inevitable that he would get a bit drunk. Of course, the most important thing was that the difficulty of the winter solstice challenge had silently melted away. A large chunk of his mind had been swept away, and his bold and cheerful vigor had returned to his body. His voice grew increasingly resonant. This is what happens when you want to eat alone. Let's not talk about what happens over there. Big bro, I am going to enjoy the profits from inside. The one who was grabbing Xuelei's shoulder was the CMO of Heavenly Crystal Biology R&D Company, Director Xie Junping. Xuelei's face was already red from the alcohol. This marketing director, who had been in office for a month, was the one whose face was truly flushed red. His face could practically light up half the bar counter. Haven't you seen the energy sector these past 2 days? It's been going straight up and down without any twists and turns. Getting a sum of money at this time is an extreme operation. Intelligence, decisiveness, ability, and luck are all indispensable. Or should I say, ever since I got to know you guys, my luck has been off the charts. Those people from headquarters are courting death. They actually wanted to hide this sort of thing and they weren't able to hide it. Xuelei was already an outstanding member of the Xia City branch. His standpoint was extremely upright. He didn't hesitate in the slightest when he opened fire. Not many people knew about the storm that had suddenly arisen on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. The intelligence obtained by the Xia City branch only showed that Chan City's Ability User Headquarters and the Order of Justice had discovered a plane similar to the Deep Blue World for some unknown reason. It was said that the two sides were originally preparing to develop it in secret, but during the course of negotiations, such an important secret matter was inexplicably leaked. This sneak attack left both the Ability User Headquarters and the Order of Justice in a rather sorry state. Not only did they have to deal with the inquiries of various powers over the past 2 days, they also had to question the other party's ability to keep secrets and even their most fundamental attitudes. It was said that after the leak, the high-level talks between the two sides had ended on bad terms many times, and now the negotiations had been put on hold indefinitely, but the impact caused was hard to clean up. At first, everyone was a little confused, not sure if it was a fact or a rumor. Later on, even more detailed information was released, and there was even a piece of extremely critical and deadly information such as, the party involved does not have the exact coordinates. At this moment, everyone finally came back to their senses. You two haven't even figured out the situation yet, and you've already scratched each other's faces until they're covered in blood. It would be a waste not to see a joke, and it would be a waste not to take advantage. At that moment, the big and small investors all entered the market. Regardless of whether they could catch any fish or not, they had to muddy the waters first. The turmoil in the global stock market was just one side of it. Xia Junping, who was an outsider, had already taken the opportunity to take a bite out of it. Satisfied, he left to watch the show. But there were even more major forces and individual gamblers who were determined to be addicted to gambling for the rest of their lives. They were eager to get a few more pieces of meat on the Pacific Ocean, in the new dimension whose coordinates had yet to be determined. It's rare to be so free. Qin Ikuan, who had been diligently performing his duty, still didn't touch a drop of alcohol tonight, but he couldn't help but sigh at this moment. It must be said that Xia City had been in a state of chaos since the end of September. People from all walks of life rushed in and out of the city. They set up a stage to sing an opera. They tossed and turned with all their might. Now the tables had turned. Whether it was headquarters or the Order of Justice, they had both fallen headfirst into the maelstrom. From the perspective of the people of the Xia City branch, such a situation was truly like a cold drink in the summer and a hot pot in the winter. It was a comfortable situation. He reached for the ice water in front of him. At this moment, Cat Eyes, who was temporarily acting as the bartender, called out from behind the counter. Jerry. With a whoosh, a fat brown figure leaped through the gap between Chinikuan's arm and the counter. It came to a screeching halt when it reached Cat Eyes. It stopped right in front of a cup of fruit juice that had just been concocted. It was a muskrat. Its iconic long tail was swinging on the table. Its tail was nearly 20 centimeters long. It was taller than the cup when it squatted normally. Since its head was small and its body was large and there was no clear dividing line between the two, it looked quite fat. But among its kind, this size was still considered underage. It was already very close to Xia Junping and Xia Junping. Xia Junping was especially startled by it. But when Xia Junping turned his head and saw the big fat fellow in front of him, not only was he not annoyed, he laughed out loud instead. See? I told you that this little fellow isn't an ordinary creature. I was screwed over by it back then. As he spoke, he reached out to touch it. However, the muskrat, who had been named Jerry, still maintained an extremely high level of vigilance. It twisted its body and circled to the other side of the cup. It even revealed its sharp incisors at Xia Junping. He narrow-minded. Xia Junping still wanted to tease this little fellow, but Cat Eyes had already given him an order. Send it to your mother. As Cat Eyes spoke, she gestured with her hands and pointed at the end of the counter where Ruiwen was sitting silently by herself. Jerry's flat head twisted back and forth twice, and its tail swung along with it. In the end, it actually lowered its body. Its front claws hooked onto the joint between the stem and the base of the cup. Its fat belly stuck to the table and its long webbed hind legs exerted force. It advanced with difficulty towards Ruiwen in a nearly gliding manner. Its appearance was enough to make one howl. If Shuelei had not pulled him back in time, Xia Junping really would have rolled over in laughter. This wasn't the first time Qin Ikuan had seen such a situation, but he still could not help but click his tongue in wonder. This isn't the intelligence a muskrat can have. Are you sure there aren't any abnormalities? The laboratory didn't find anything. Besides, as long as Ruiwen likes it, what problems could there be? What logic? Qin Ikuan was dumbstruck and speechless. The feeling faction, and the reasoning faction, couldn't be said together no matter what. At this time a call came through. After Qin Ikuan took the call, he said a few words and then stood up. He turned his head and said, Leister, help me move a few things. Shuelei stood up. Xia Junping was not to be outdone. He swayed as he stood up, raised his hand and said, I'll help too. Qin Ikuan swept a glance at Xia Junping's physique. He didn't hold too much hope towards the results of this short month of training, but he still gave him a bit of face. He laughed and said, 2 people is enough. We'll be back soon. He pulled Shuelei and rode the elevator up. Xia Junping was still a bit drunk. He was distracted for a moment and didn't follow. He could only sit down resentfully as he watched the elevator close. But when he turned his head, he saw cat eyes concentrating on mixing drinks. Rui Wen and Jerry were also in their own country. They didn't seem to care about anyone else. He felt that it was boring. He was also a bit scared. It was true that he liked beautiful women. Disregarding Rui Wen, Cat Eyes' image was very much his cup of tea. But the more he came into contact with the inner world, the more he understood the depths of it. It was best for him to stay as far away from such dangerous people as possible. Xia Junping simply got up again. He waited for the next elevator and went up as well. It was all right on the second underground floor, but when he reached the entrance hall of the first floor, the cold wind of the winter night blew and he couldn't hold on much longer. Finally, he still had a bit of reason left. He rushed to the edge of the small plaza in front of the door and vomited into the underbrush. Afterwards, his condition was much better. The strict training he had undergone during this period of time also showed results. He only wore a thin sweater and stood outside, but he didn't feel that cold. He surveyed his surroundings and borrowed the light from the door to illuminate the area. He could actually faintly see the depth of the jungle 6 to 7 meters in front of him. Even though it was still hazy, there were only 2 living things in that area, a bird and a beast. Neither of them could escape his senses. According to Dean Wan's words, he was already able to synthesize sound waves, smell, heat radiation, and many other perceptual differences. He was able to distinguish living things from the surrounding environment. According to the inner world's terms, this was spiritual sense. At this step, even though it was far from being an awakening, it could be said that he possessed a certain amount of extraordinary strength. Xia Junping could even barely tell that the bird that was slightly moving up and down on the branch was a crow. Of course, it was far inferior to ink. It seemed that his spiritual sense had improved again in the past 2 days. It was really smooth sailing. Yay! Xia Junping clenched his fists and jumped a few times in the cold wind to vent the excitement in his heart. Perhaps because his movements were too large, the crow at the edge of the forest tilted its head, as if it was sizing him up. Xia Junping whistled at the crow, but it didn't respond. Instead, at the end of the forest path on the other side of the plaza, Shuelei's voice rang out. "Hey, why are you outside? I wanted to help, but I didn't expect you to run so fast." Xia Junping complained half-truthfully, but the next moment he saw the sturdy and heavy metal box on Shuelei and Qin Yikuan's shoulders that was half the height of a person. The rest of his words turned into a strange cry. "Faster, Xikemi. This isn't grass, it's a precision component that's about to be destroyed by our teacher Luo. I think his credit limit must be in the negatives again." That's not necessarily the case. The SVIP model usage fee is still quite considerable. Lazy, you put on the bracelet at the first moment. It's inevitable that a full man doesn't know the hunger of a hungry man. Qin Yikuan unloaded the box that weighed several hundred kilograms from his shoulder like he was taking off his school bag and placed it in the hull. Only then did the box's load-bearing pulley come into play. Shuelei did as he was told. Xia Junping came over and curiously touched the outer shell of the box, but he couldn't tell what it was. Chapter 590. No one took a crow that could be seen everywhere seriously. Xia Junping and the other 2 walked into the hall. The boxes weighing hundreds of kilograms made muffled sounds like thunder as they stepped on the ground. "This is our teacher Luo." From Shuelei's perspective, this bit of weight was nothing. But he had a problem with Luo Nan's way of doing things these past few days. "It wasn't easy for me to get into the basics of Sanzhou. I've been messing up my schedule these past few days. I can't leave the front door, I can't take a step out of the back door. I'm probably going to slip down again." Xia Junping chuckled. "He's reverting to his old ways. Didn't you say that he used to be like this?" Qin Yikuan pressed the button to open the elevator and sent the box inside. After turning around, he also joined in on the conversation. Of course, he was mostly explaining, "Mr. Luo is also striking while the iron is hot. After all, with such an impressive result like the Ring of Blood and Will, and with Ghost Eye as a sparring partner, this is a rare opportunity that cannot be missed." Shuelei displayed his stance. "He fiddles with these exoskeletons every day just to strike while the iron is hot?" Qin Yikuan smiled and asked Shuelei to move the other box into the elevator. At the same time, he raised his hand and shook it, showing the rather heavy metal bracelet on his wrist. "This is also the result. As a physical body, I thought that I would never be able to touch the abyss in my life. I didn't expect Mr. Luo to be able to solve this problem so easily. This thing is now very popular. Shuelei subconsciously shook his wrist. The weight on his wrist made him lose the confidence to continue speaking. He could only mutter, body and soul should be balanced. Such a good aptitude. Beep beep beep. The alarm of the elevator rang. After all, it was not a freight elevator. 2 metal boxes had actually exceeded the limit of 1,300 kilograms. All right, I'll use the one next to it. Shuelei struggled to pull the box out again. At that moment a call came through. Xie Junping helped him press the button. I'll go this way too. B6, right? After much difficulty the elevator doors closed and the car descended. Shuelei was on the phone the whole time. He hummed repeatedly and occasionally said words like Christmas or New Year's Day. By the time the elevator arrived he still hadn't finished speaking. Xie Junping then helped Shuelei pull out the box. At this time Qin Yikun was already waiting outside. He was swiping his authority, which was to verify his identity. Xie Junping felt a toothache when he saw this scene. A good portion of Gear's 7 basement floors were remodeled by Yen Hong during this period. Because he had always been engaged in highly classified research on the archetype format and the burners, these underground buildings had practically been transformed into a heavily guarded fortress by him. When Xie Junping and Luo Nan first came here, they suffered a loss due to the issue of authority. Whether it was him or Luo Nan, neither of them liked this sort of arrangement. They simply abandoned most of the defense systems when they took over. However, Luo Nan had clashed with headquarters last time, and Gear had been severely damaged by headquarters tank and the others. They had no choice but to consider the issue of safety when they repaired it. Plus, Luo Nan had been using Gear as a base for research these past few days. The corresponding defensive measures were reinforced layer by layer. This was especially true for the 6th floor, which was the main laboratory. The 7th floor, which contained the mainframe database, energy station and other core installations, had already been built into a small fortress by the technical staff of the Xia City branch. It was said that according to these safety standards, even if an extraordinaire were to charge over, these 2 layers of the fortress would be able to hold out for 1 to 2 minutes. This was enough time for the Xia City branch to take the next step in providing reinforcements. Safety and convenience could not be balanced at the same time. The higher the safety factor, the lower the comfort factor. The 2 boxes of equipment parts were actually much simpler here. They were directly sent through a conveyor belt to the laboratory's warehouse for classification and inspection. The 3 of them just had to go through the inspection procedure step by step. They're really looking for trouble. Xie Junping had the authority to enter the laboratory, but he was seriously impatient with the complicated inspection process. At this time he heard Shuelei say, "The troublemakers are in the back." Tianqi just called. He said that he couldn't get in touch with Nanster. He asked me to tell him that the Mystic Arts Research Society is going to conduct an end-of-year activity. They're going to organize a Mystic Arts theme week during Christmas and New Year's. The venue is set to be at Gear. According to Tianqi, this should be a warm-up for the next semester's relocation. They want to take advantage of this opportunity to move some equipment over. All the functions that can be used have been activated and the activity space has been expanded. F***CK. Why are these people causing trouble? Xie Junping raised his wrist. He wanted to make a phone call and clarify the situation. However, he didn't have the authority to communicate on the 6th floor. He couldn't make the call at all. Shuelei advised, "It's hard to say even if we get in touch. After all, this isn't Nanster's private property. The property belongs to the Mystic Arts Research Society. We can't say anything about when they move and how they move." As he spoke, Shuelei turned to look at the brand new security equipment around them. Maybe Nanster needs to find another workshop. There's definitely room for discussion here. As the person directly responsible for Luo Nan's security, Qin Yikuan's tone was calm and certain. He didn't feel that this was a problem. Xie Junping went, Only now did he remember that Luo Nan had the Xia City branch behind him. If he were to put on a show and discuss with the Mystic Arts Research Society, the latter might not have any leeway to refuse. Levels. It was all a matter of levels. He also felt that this wasn't a big deal. It just so happened that the 3 of them had already passed their authority verification. He casually spat out, "Speaking of which, a workshop? Are you sure it's not a factory?" The three of them walked inside amidst their laughter. They passed through 2 more security gates before entering the core area of the laboratory. Upon entering, they discovered that behind the unfriendly and serious face of this laboratory was just a young and inexperienced rookie. The entire floor was completely empty. Not a single person could be seen. There were only a few multifunctional robots driving motors and carrying equipment. They buzzed through the corridors and the passageways on both sides. Even with the Xia City branch's vigorous support, the installation of various equipment was far from complete. Many spaces were still empty, or perhaps only a small portion of them had been completed. The only places that were truly in use were the warehouse where the 2 boxes of components were stored, as well as Luo Nan's current workspace. This wasn't the first time the 3 of them had come here. They walked inside with familiarity. Soon they saw Luo Nan's figure at the end of the passageway on the right. However, this young genius who was famous for his mental senses didn't seem to have discovered their arrival. Luo Nan was standing in the middle of a pile of mechanical arms. He held an electronic pen in his hand and drew in the middle of the work area. Following his movements, a small portion of the dozen or so mechanical arms that were distributed within the space of over 100 square meters were flexing and moving. Each of them had a different division of labor. Some of them were moving equipment. Some of them were assembling and dismantling components. Some of them were even brazenly welding. It caused sparks to flicker within the work area. Qin Yikuan and the others watched with twitching eyelids. Xia Junping was a bit stupefied. Does he really want to use this place as a factory? Shui Lei turned his head to look all around. How come I don't see Worker Zhai? Qin Yikuan answered, Worker Zhai is working overtime today. He didn't come. Shui Lei turned his head in shock. He nearly twisted his neck. Hey, is he operating it by himself? Qin Yikuan grinned. There's a military-grade AI here. According to Worker Zhai, it's quite easy to use. It should be. It felt fine when I came over in the afternoon. Then the afternoon ended up like this? The corners of Shui Lei's eyes twitched. He stared fixedly at the figure within the forest of mechanical arms. He confirmed that there was no immediate danger before sweeping a glance at the clock to the side. The clock showed that Luo Nan had been working continuously for 7 hours. In other words, he had skipped at least half of this morning's classes. He's really gone mad. Speaking of which, is he going to use his mental senses to cheat on the final exam? If I had this ability a few years ago, I would have flown away a long time ago. Xia Junping blurted out a sentence, but he soon shifted the focus of his attention. That headband. Is it that extraordinaire? Yeah, it's the one from Jin Tong. Shui Lei confirmed Xia Junping's guess. The item they were discussing was fixed to a mechanical arm in front of Luo Nan. Its appearance was very unremarkable. If one didn't have a fixed view of it, it would have been mixed up with the many equipment components in the surroundings. Actually, Xia Junping didn't have a clear concept of the power of extraordinaires. However, this didn't prevent him from feeling deep veneration for this spoils of war that had been dyed with the blood of the world's top figures. Of course, he felt even more respect for the victor who obtained this spoils of war. I really didn't see it back then. Hey. Before Xia Junping could finish speaking, the headband that had attracted everyone's attention was pulled by the mechanical arm. It was placed squarely on top of Luo Nan's head. Xia Junping and the other 2 all saw it. The headband, which was originally quite wide, clearly shrank the moment it was placed on top of Luo Nan's head. The headband fit perfectly on Luo Nan's forehead. It fit perfectly as if it was custom-made for Luo Nan. Luo Nan tossed away the electronic pen in his hand right after the headband was placed in place. This was like a signal. The surrounding dozen or so mechanical arms twisted their joints, pushing components and modules from various directions before Luo Nan. Then they began to equip themselves. The miniature energy furnace, chest and abdomen armor, the 4 limbs integrated modules, and other main structures had already undergone many adjustments. They were completely compatible with Luo Nan's figure. It only took 2 seconds to complete. Other parts such as the survival system, mounted weapons and so on were put on his body one after another. In the blink of an eye, a fully armed deep blue walker appeared before their eyes. It's like watching a movie. A remake of Iron Man. It looks like it, right? It's just that its color is a bit plain and it's on the skinny side. Compared to the relaxed attitudes of the 2 youngsters, Qin Yikuan, who was a professional, saw things a bit more. Strictly speaking, this exoskeleton equipment was slimmer than the standard version. Luo Nan should have removed a portion of the mounted equipment and even some parts of the armor. No matter what his goal was, this sort of modification was far too daring for a highly integrated and relatively mature combat platform. In actual combat. Before he could finish his thought, a buzzing, vibrating sound rang within the workshop. This was the sign of the miniature energy furnace starting to heat up. The engine's power was rapidly rising. "Hey, test the machine here." The second half of Xie Juanping's words were shattered by the explosive sound of an explosion. A gale blew in front of the eyes of the three onlookers. The mechanical arms in the work area swayed back and forth. The idle components on the floor and stage were blown into a mess. The three of them were able to capture the trajectory of the movement. But by the time they turned their heads, the exoskeleton armor had already come to a stop on the other side of the large room. The wall that had just been painted was behind it. Chapter 591. He didn't. At most he missed by 10 centimeters. And he even turned around. There was no need to talk about Shuelei's eyesight, but he felt a bit bitter in his mouth. This is the support of the exoskeleton. Luo Nan's displacement process of extreme static, extreme movement and extreme stillness was too barbaric and direct, even though it was the least pressure. He had already awakened and he had used the 9 orifices and 6 roots technique to stabilize the foundation of his body. If it were an ordinary person, they would have suffered from cerebral ischemia, internal organs would have been displaced and tendons would have been fractured. But this kind of barbarity would be the ultimate impact and lethality in actual combat. Xuanan pondered to himself. He could barely react to this speed and impact. He wouldn't be killed in an instant, but he would be in a state where he was wide open for 3 rounds at most. No technique would be of any use at that time. He could completely imagine the consequences of falling to the ground. Shuelei understood more and more now that Gym Master Xiu had painstakingly transferred his energy to human-computer interaction. Although he had gone to the simulation chamber to play a few rounds these past few days, his progress in the real world was clearly lagging behind. He needed to have a greater sense of urgency in the future. Shuelei felt that the same situation was a spur, but Qin Yikuan felt that it was more realistic. The exoskeleton emitted a buzzing sound of electricity. It was dense and not noisy. On one hand, it displayed a good body condition. On the other hand, it seemed to have a special mode of action. And at this time, he felt a slight itch on his skin that had yet to dissipate. It was as if he had been struck by static electricity. He looked at Luo Nan's feet. There were no traces of friction at all when he stopped and braked. He immediately understood. Electromagnetic fields. Speaking of which, the deep blue platform already has such a mature application. He had teamed up with God for some time. He had seen Maglev before, but he had never seen Luo Nan spin through the void like this. There was not a single trace of smoke and fire in the microcontrol effect. Luo Nan was certainly inferior to a professional soldier in terms of operating skills. This kind of effect was reflected in the transmission or control system. The two professionals each had their own thoughts. Xie Junping, an amateur, only looked at appearances. He saw that the outer layer of Luo Nan's body seemed to have a layer of flickering electricity circulating around it. He heard Qin Yikuan mention electromagnetic fields. He immediately thought of the information he had heard from Shuelei and the others these past few days. He slapped his thigh. Releasing magnetism and discharging electricity. Could it be Jin Tong's unique skill? Is this headband hiding that secret manual? Xie Junping's idea came out of nowhere, but it was just right. Shuelei and Qin Yikuan were both stupefied to the side. Suddenly, they had the feeling of realization that something like this was possible. Speaking of which, Luo Nan had brought out quite a few things during this period of time. The cage theory could be said to be a consistent accumulation, but the many days of debugging and remodeling high-precision equipment allowed him to have a nose and eyes. Luo Nan had the mysterious flavor of an omnipotent capable person. Of course, Xie Junping was just making a wild guess, but it was also true. Only now did Luo Nan notice the 3 of them coming over. He stopped the experiment, took off the helmet and walked over step by step, still wearing the headband. Although Xie Junping was a typical second-generation rich kid, he had very few opportunities to come into close contact with deep blue walkers. He immediately stepped forward, rubbed and satisfied his craving. At the same time, he didn't forget to verify the hole in his brain. Nanster inside this headband. Luo Nan smiled at Xie Junping. He actually admitted it directly. It's more or less a reference to Jin Tong's model. It's an extraordinary power of electromagnetism. It's also the most universal ability that can be grasped at this stage. Hey, there's really something inside. It's yet to be excavated. Luo Nan used his fingertips to tap the headband, emitting muffled popping sounds. This attracted the gazes of the three to focus on the headband. But then he sighed. It's a pity that I can't use this mode for too long with the current strength of my fleshly body. Don't even think about using it in actual combat. I can only use it as a weight-bearing exercise. I can also use it as an experimental machine to verify a few ideas. It's already very strongly. Xue Lei had a relatively good understanding of the strength of Luo Nan's body. Even if I can't use that mode just now as my normal state, the short burst of a few dozen seconds is still extremely terrifying. If I'm paired with a blade, I'm dead for sure. Luo Nan still shook his head. If I'm up against an extraordinary, my speed still won't be able to display any advantage. If I were to face them head-on, not to mention anything else, just Jin Tong would be able to shatter both the machine and the person. I'm dead for sure. Xue Lei couldn't hold back from ridiculing. Who told you to go up against an extraordinary? Have you been training with Ghost Eye for the past 2 days? Shouldn't you be increasing your confidence? Luo Nan laughed and didn't continue this topic. Xie Junping turned to look at Qi Nikuan and asked in a low voice. Speaking of which, hasn't he been under a bit of pressure lately? Qi Nikuan could only shake his head. Luo Nan pressed against his ear at this time and received a report from the AI. Oh, the parts have been delivered? Xue Lei grinned. 2 whole boxes over 1,300 kilograms in weight. You want these toys? Don't tell me you want to verify that headband. Luo Nan knew that this was probably the easiest reason for people to accept. Right now, many people expressed curiosity towards the various theories he released. They even questioned their origins. Ari, who was far away on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, used this as a breakthrough point to fabricate rumors to disgust him. Luo Nan could obviously ignore this. With his current status, he already had the qualifications to disregard all of this. In all these years, no one had ever asked where Jin Tong's abilities came from. However, being able to give people a basic direction was always a bit better than making random guesses. At the very least, his current remodeling of the Deep Blue platform wasn't wrong in saying this. Luo Nan didn't want to deliberately lie to Xue Lei and his other friends. He didn't give a direct answer. He didn't admit nor deny. After a laugh, he changed the topic. It just so happens that I've run out of materials. With you guys replenishing these, I'll finish the experiments at hand in a spurt of energy. Tonight. Oh, I'll use this weekend as well. Qi Nikuan furrowed his brows. You're not going home? Yeah. 2 days might not even be enough. Hey, hold on. Xue Lei actually recalled the contents of Tianqi's phone call. He repeated the matter of the so-called Mystic Arts Theme Week to Luo Nan in a few words. The Mystic Arts Research Society will be coming over tomorrow to set up the venue. Luo Nan didn't take this seriously. His response was very dull. Let's do it. After all, the property rights are in their hands. Won't it disturb you? Luo Nan had already considered this point. It's fine to just seal off the 5th to 7th floors. I asked Sister Yuan to set up a separate system. It's not the same system as the academy, so it's not a problem to keep it clean. Let's do this for now. I'll talk to them when I have time. The 7th floor was the energy center and the database. The 6th floor was the main body of the laboratory. The 5th floor was the training field. The modified body needed to undergo a more comprehensive examination there. This was the space that Luo Nan had circled out for himself. There were some problems with the legal principles, but he was willing to communicate with the Mystic Arts Research Society. The price could be discussed. Before his credit limit was maxed out, this bit of money really didn't count for much. Xie Junping volunteered. Tang Yi isn't here, so it's easier to talk to the other members of the society. I'll take care of this matter. Then I'll have to trouble Brother Ping. Oh, there's one more thing. Luo Nan suddenly thought of a key point. He turned his head to size things up and used the electromagnetic technique that he had just learned a few days ago. He extended his hand and grabbed the electronic pen that he had just tossed down. At the same time, he opened up his work area and brought up the holographic structural diagram of gear. They can mess around with the furnishings of the building, but I don't want them to destroy the overall structure of the room. especially the second, third, and fifth floors above ground. There's also the first and second floors below ground as well as that large courtyard. He circled 7 or 8 relatively important locations as he spoke. The main structure here is where the essence of my mother's design lies. So, Xie Junping understood tacitly. He patted his chest and guaranteed, I'll keep an eye on them. Only then did he seriously look at the structural diagram. Unfortunately, his eyes were blurry from looking at it, so he couldn't see anything. He just mumbled to strengthen his memory, they can't be destroyed. Otherwise they'll destroy the layout. How does it have anything to do with feng shui? That's not what I meant. Luonan didn't mind. Instead he laughed. If we're talking about feng shui, it really does look a bit like it. After all, building here involves the philosophy of man and nature. It's impossible to bypass these things. It was already quite late and it was already past 6 o'clock. Since Luonan was going to work overtime, Shuelei and the others didn't want to disturb him any longer. They said their goodbyes and left. Luonan watched them leave. He stood in place and adjusted his breathing, calming his mind once more. Only then did he walk back to the middle of the cluster of mechanical arms. He unloaded the body that had just gone through a round of testing. He continued to draw lines and diagrams based on the results of the test, making preparations for the important experiment that was about to happen soon. The lines within the work area were complex, but the virtual brain system interface was already open within the brain domain that the outside world couldn't see. The equipment interface and the large user manual shone before his eyes, providing him with the most direct guidance. Right now Luonan already understood that the main function of the virtual brain system was to manufacture the dynamo core or the psychic core. Moreover, it was to carry out the manufacturing and debugging of the relevant supporting equipment for these precise and peculiar creations. Therefore, the vast majority of the contents of the system's user manual revolved around materials, manufacturing, installation, and debugging. On the other hand, the fundamental nomological foundation of the dynamo core and the psychic core, the configuration wasn't written too much. It was just a classic example like the fortress. There were also operational instructions, judgment tests, and so on during the conversion process. Of course, this wasn't a good thing for Luonan to further delve into the nomological principles of configuration. But the technical guidance that was extremely close to the practical application level was extremely in line with his current needs. Especially since Luonan already possessed the psychic core of the external neuron. He also had the headband as the core conversion equipment. After building this laboratory, all he needed to do was transfer the design ideas within the virtual brain system out. He could compare and verify them one by one. Of course, this was accompanied by a large amount of mistakes and losses. Luonan didn't care about this anymore. After he transformed into Teacher Luo, he received a commission for the usage of the SVIP model. He also received a credit limit that rose with the tide. These were enough to support his willfulness. Luonan was fed with an enormous amount of trial and error opportunities. Even though Luonan couldn't be considered a developer in the relevant field for the time being, he was getting closer and closer to a qualified technician. Chapter 592. Time flowed noiselessly under extreme concentration. He was 30 meters deep underground and he didn't know the changes of day and night. Luonan just used the experimental mission as a yardstick. Oh, it was a bit shameless to call it an experiment right now. He just followed the requirements of the virtual brain system and tried to assemble usable combat equipment using components from Earth's technology. Luonan occasionally raised his head, only to see that it was 2 o'clock in the morning on the 21st. It was already the winter solstice. Today had quite the significance in the East Asian cultural circles. In the past, his family would gather together no matter what on this day. But today, Luonan had used the rotten excuse of concentrated training to run away. One could imagine the unbearable scene when he returned home. This thought only flashed in Luonan's mind for a moment before it was squeezed out of existence by the flood of information. Right now, the number of virtual and real interfaces before his eyes had already increased to 4. They included the projected work area, the virtual brain system equipment interface, the user manual. In addition, there was a self-inspection interface that had been opened midway. It was labeled Electromagnetic Vanguard Number 1. Right now, the self-inspection progress was nearing its end. The preliminary inspection results had already been arranged in succession, including the relevant analysis. Took up most of his attention. The left arm module has been completely destroyed. I need to replace it. The backup energy furnace has fallen off. I need to recognize this. It's the fault of my design. The outer armor is corroded. I need to replace part of it. The combat blade. I need to bring 2 more spares. It's too easy to break. The kinetic energy arsenal. Large caliber ammunition and javelins. I need to calculate the ratio again. The consumption is too great. I suggest replenishing nearby. Where's nearby? Luo Nan scratched his head. His fingertips bumped against his headband, which was already a bit warm. He subconsciously changed directions, repeating this process over and over again. The 2 large boxes of spare parts that Shui Lei and the others had sent over were originally sorted and stored in the warehouse by the artificial intelligence. Right now, Luo Nan used his half-baked skills and train of thought to dismantle them into a messy mess. Luckily, the military-grade artificial intelligence that cost him 50 honor points to rent was still worth the price. The virtual brain system hidden deep within the external neuron displayed superior intelligence. As time passed, the collected data was relatively complete and the progress was finally on the right track. And right now it was already 5 o'clock in the morning. The multifunctional robot shuttled back and forth between the laboratory and the even more spacious passageway area in front of it, categorizing and arranging his completed works one by one. They were of different sizes and covered a large area. When Luo Nan walked out of the jungle of mechanical arms, he saw the equipment area that took up 40 to 50 square meters. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Isn't there too much? I can't carry it all at once. Flag bearer, calculate the weight. Flag bearer was the code name of the military-grade artificial intelligence. It was the main butler of the laboratory, responsible for the allocation of all resources and basic operations. The relevant data was also readily available. The weight of the equipment is 657.5 kilograms, and the estimated weight of the box is 724 kilograms. As expected, it's time to split them up. Shui Lei and the others had brought over a ton of spare parts and materials. They had been condensed to this degree, and this was already Luo Nan's highest level. Plus, there were also large amounts of ammunition and consumables that were irreplaceable. Luo Nan didn't waste any more energy. He snapped his fingers. Divide the boxes into 4 batches. Each batch must be under 200 kilograms. The main structural components are prioritized. Oh, there's also the remote maintenance system. Pack it up as well. This counts separately. Following Luo Nan's command, the multifunctional robots controlled by the flag bearer rolled their caterpillar belts to get busy once more. Luo Nan stared from the side. He watched as he imitated, designed, and forged the equipment modules, and replacement components were loaded into the airdrop boxes one after another. It would be an exaggeration to say that Luo Nan felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. But the feeling of solidity that was built up bit by bit was something that nothing could replace. 7 days had passed since the lecture on the 14th. Luo Nan had been preparing at all times during these 7 days. He was going to carry out an assassination operation of the highest difficulty. He had personally set up a guillotine, forged shackles, sharpened blades, and increased his preparations bit by bit. All for the final instant when his hand rose and fell. The one he wanted to behead was undoubtedly Gongqi. He was a spiritual type extraordinary who was currently tossing and turning in the cloud world anchored by his mother. He was one of the top 100 strongest people in the world. Though Luo Nan already had the departed soul of an extraordinary under his hands, he wouldn't overestimate himself because of this. After all, Her Majesty Empress Wu wouldn't take the lead again. She would first beat the enemy to a pulp, injuring his mind. He only had one chance to kill such a powerful enemy. If he missed this chance, the situation would slip to an uncontrollable level. He might even be killed instead. Luo Nan told himself to have patience and determination. He needed to constantly increase his bargaining chips. He also needed to think of ways to weaken Gongqi's foundation by every possible means. From his perspective, the two were organically unified. In the end, his plan was inseparable from his own ability and the accumulation of bargaining chips. His accumulation wasn't limited to sparring with Ghost Eye. The packing of precision equipment was a large field of study. The complex environment he was about to face put extremely high demands on him. Luo Nan was quite at ease with Standard Bearer, a military-grade AI, doing the calculations. So he set everything aside for the time being. He walked to the living area in the corner of the laboratory and lay down on a single bed. He closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. Luonan finally knew about the matter of Bro Octopus and He Yuan, as well as the matter of Luonan's security team drugging him. Luonan didn't care about the nature of the matter. What he cared about was the result. He saw that it was the drugging that helped him extricate himself from his extreme exhaustion. It allowed the scattered light of his high-tension state to gather once more. In the end, he realized a major breakthrough. He still couldn't enjoy it to this day. So Luonan began to adjust his state of mind and work and rest. He strived to take out a complete period of rest every day. After the lecture on the 14th, his skyrocketed reputation and enormous profit potential had truly diluted the negative effects of the 2000th incident. It gave him some leeway to buffer. Luonan meditated and visualized right now. Within the visualization space that seemed to be deep space, stars converged together. It was as if a person was dancing and dancing with joy. The structure of the character, it was muddled within the visualization diagram of the star atlas. It formed a dense cluster of galaxies that spun in the void. It was as if it was the center of the universe. Luonan's consciousness also merged within, embedding itself in the most core position. It seemed to wander unhurriedly around everywhere. Luonan gradually entered a wonderful state of meditative forgetfulness without thought or worry. It was already 8 o'clock in the morning by the time he woke up. 3 hours of high-quality rest had restored his physical strength and energy to full capacity. He passed through the jungle of robotic arms once more and arrived at a spacious and empty area. The modules, components, and ammunition consumables, along with the remote repair system that he had specially requested, were neatly stacked within the 6 airdrop crates. The crates were opened, awaiting Luonan's final inspection. Luonan checked the list seriously once to confirm that there were no mistakes. In the end, he stopped before the first airdrop crate that was scheduled to be delivered. The entire crate only had a single module installed. The overall outline was extremely close to a human torso. It was like an exoskeleton assembled armor. But Luonan knew very well that the interior of the armor had already been stuffed to the brim by the energy furnace and the transmission system. Even Jerry couldn't fit inside. Luonan extended his hand to caress the torso module. At the same time, a virtual window labeled Electromagnetic Vanguard 1 was projected onto his retina, conducting a final inspection. Of course, this module wasn't meant for human use. It wasn't a wearable device. It was a design that was completely different from the idea of exoskeleton armor. And the control terminal of this design came from the headband that Luonan wore. It was the God-binding headband that was displayed in the virtual brain system. Oh, I hope this toy can endure more tossing and turning. Even if it was only temporary, it couldn't be changed every day. In the end, his level as a designer wasn't high enough. Luonan sighed. He patted the outer armor of the module and stood up. The multifunctional robot that was already waiting to the side came forward to carry out the final sealing of the crate. After everything was done, Luonan picked up one of the crates and gave it a feel. He nodded. There shouldn't be any problems. The 200-kilogram airdrop crate was only one size smaller than the crate that Shuelei and the others had brought over yesterday. The average person really wouldn't be able to lift it. For Luonan, who was already awakened, this bit of weight was nothing. But what he had to do next was far more difficult than lifting the crate by 100 times. Luonan took a deep breath and just sat cross-legged in front of the 6 airdrop crates. He extended his hand to support the first crate that was about to be delivered. His eyes were half closed and the position of his mind rose in an instant. He suddenly passed through 30 meters of ground and crossed 1,000 meters in the air. A thought floated in the air above Xia City. It was the highest level of traffic. He looked down from high above and overlooked the enormous city within the thin morning mist. He could see tens of thousands of high-rise buildings distributed within a 200-kilometer radius. They formed the main structure of Xia City. 200 million residents lived within this steel jungle. They were like insects crawling within the branches and leaves of the vines. Together they formed the entire ecology of Xia City. Expanding outwards, there was the boundless ocean to the east. The 4 satellite cities of Xia City were distributed in a ring in the north, south and south directions. There was also a military defense line further out. The outermost area was close to 300 kilometers away from the center of Xia City. This was also the limit of the entire Xia city metropolitan area. If one looked further out, the open sea was not counted. The inland area was a vast plain and fertile land. Before the era of distortion, there used to be a bustling city with a dense population. Presently it was already a desolate land where mutants wreaked havoc. There was such a clear boundary between prosperity and desolation. But on a more macroscopic level, it was only a part of this planet's ecosystem. To put it more broadly, it was nothing more than a speck of dust within this space and time. Chapter 593. There were at least 5 or 6 different space-time structures distributed within the range of Luonan's mental senses. This included the Earth that bore and gave birth to Luonan. It even included the most grand universe that stretched out endlessly. It also included the mysterious cloud world. If one were to lower the standard even further, Xia City and its surrounding extraordinaries had their own unique laws and laws. Though they were not stable, Xia City and its surrounding extraordinaries had their own unique laws and laws. Of course, this also included Luonan, who was the origin of the large coordinate system that continued to spread out. There were also 2 other relatively unique existences. One was the psychic wave network that covered Xia City and its surroundings. Some of its tentacles extended to the entire world. This network had been operated by President Ouyang for many years. Even though it was mostly used as a communication network when it formally interfered with the material plane, its laws were strict and strict. It was a body of its own, not inferior to any extraordinary domain. The other was the unique building where Luonan's fleshly body resided. It was gear. From Luonan's perspective, there was a domain quietly taking form with gear as its axis. It used a single gear to drive a myriad of orders. From near to far, from real to virtual, it combed and operated the chaotic and disorderly energy and information between heaven and earth. It coupled and organized, gathering astonishing energy in silence. It projected a long chain that anchored the distant space-time, erecting a bridge that linked the 2 worlds. Such space-time laws were in no way inferior to those of the extraordinary domain. They even surpassed them in terms of level and scope. This was his mother's work. It was indeed like a feng shui layout, but it was also a domain that possessed its own laws. It was a grand, extraordinary configuration. At this very moment, Luonan was using the laws of gear to do something that even extraordinaries would find hard to do. He roughly observed the surrounding environment and confirmed that there were already extraordinaries overflowing in Xia City. For the time being, there weren't any major powers paying attention to him. After the cage theory came out, contact is invasion became a hot phrase in the inner world. There were even people from the Ability User Society who jointly proposed to enact a Privacy Act. The content was probably to restrict the willful casting of psychic ability user senses and so on. Let's not talk about whether or not this purely eye-catching act had any meaning. The mental senses and lock-ons of extraordinaries were much more cautious and conservative than usual in this sensitive period. Especially for Luonan. This really did give Luonan ample space. It also made him more daring and reckless when he did things. Luonan's thoughts plunged in the opposite direction, cast towards the gear that seemed to be spinning yet not spinning in the depths of the jungle of the North Bank. And at this time, an incorporeal and mystical structure opened up in the depths of the void, forming a passageway that led straight to the distant space-time. The passageway pulled Luonan's thoughts over, and in the blink of an eye, an unstoppable gale and cloud assaulted his face. In a certain sense, the cloud world was simply Luonan's own back garden. If those 2 unwelcome guests weren't here, then it would be even more deserving of its reputation. The thought that Luonan projected was like a kite fluttering leisurely in the air. It made a turn within the turbulent clouds. It was just a turn, but the environment of the void where it was located was painted with other colors. Clouds surged high up in the sky at this moment, clearly reflecting the image of a jungle and the buildings hidden within. To be exact, it was the jungle of the north shore of Acumen College where Luonan currently resided. This image faded to almost nothingness. It was undoubtedly a mirage. And in just half a second, colors were added to this mirage scene. A rough reddish-black background could be faintly seen. The shape of an undulating mountainous region was faintly discernible. There was also dark red lava that spread and flowed. 2 completely different scenes of nothingness mixed together with the surging clouds high up in the sky. The colors were mottled and it was dazzling to the eye. A mushed-mouthed ape just so happened to pass by nearby. It was also bewitched by this marvelous scene. It bared its teeth and rushed over, seeming to want to touch this marvelous scene. Luo Nan's hand, which was supporting the airdrop box in the underground 6th floor of gear, didn't move at all. He just slightly tightened his brows. The word that was resplendent with starlight within his visualized space seemed to truly come alive. It folded its hands, bent its knees, and spun and danced. The myriad stars that converged to form the word I blended into one entity, and they each formed their own star orbits. They drew a boundless star atlas in the deep void. Luo Nan's soul strength, which he had accumulated explosively over the past few days, circulated and transformed within this star atlas. It naturally converged and fused, condensing into an indistinct and immeasurable point at the very center of the star atlas. It became the sole origin of the vast coordinate system, and it couldn't be moved. When this coordinate system took form, Luo Nan's mind, the laboratory he resided in, the cloud world of another spacetime continuum, and even the rough and gloomy nameless mountainous region clearly rang with a muffled roar of thunder. When the sound of thunder crushed down gear, the cloud world, and the nameless mountainous region. These three spacetime structures had always operated according to their own laws and rules. They froze in an instant. It was only for an instant. Perhaps it was 1,000th of a second or even a 10,000th of a second. Then they recovered their fixed operating trajectories. But in that instant of freezing, the airdrop box that Luo Nan's hand pressed down on became the only moving object. This so-called movement was not the ordinary form of sliding, dropping, or flying. In that instant, the light and shadow of its body warped. It was like a mirage, and it suddenly disappeared. The two intersecting scenes of the mirage in the cloud world disappeared as well. So much so that the mushed-mouth ape could only stare blankly at the thick layer of clouds that hadn't changed for many years after charging over. Luo Nan's eyes were still half-closed, but his mind was a thread ahead of time. He set off from the origin and drew a long, perfectly straight line. He imprinted a point on the large coordinate system. The coordinates of that point was his designated destination. The line was flat and straight. It didn't bend in the slightest. But in this moment, the airdrop box that crossed space drew an indescribably complex trajectory in the dark and unfathomable void. It pierced through the barrier of space and time twice in succession. Only then did its short and gorgeous journey come to an end. It truly possessed powerful kinetic energy. It carried the whooshing sound of the wind as it descended diagonally to the ground from a height of several dozen meters in midair. The air it pierced through already carried the fishy smell of rotten eggs. This was the result of the long years of accumulation of sulfides and halide gases that were spewed out by the intense volcanic activity. The airdrop box's journey was nearing its end. All that remained was time for the show of universal gravitation. Luo Nan's eyelids blinked, but they didn't completely open. In this moment, his originally vigorous and abundant soul strength was like the water of a lake that had its bottom completely ruptured. The water level dropped by more than half in an instant. The excessively terrifying output of soul strength caused his brain to experience a short period of dizziness. But he couldn't afford to rest. His consciousness locked tightly onto the falling airdrop box. He calculated its position and distance on the plane of his soul cloak. The airdrop box's shock absorber equipment automatically activated when it felt the movement of the box. It attempted to correct its posture and weaken the impact. But before these equipment could truly display their use, a figure leaped up from a certain fissure in the ground diagonally below. The figure rose into the air and firmly grabbed the falling airdrop box before landing on the ground with ease. Chapter 594. Though he was vexed, he still had to do the work that needed to be done. Luo Nan spent an entire morning to send 5 of the 6 airdrop boxes over. Actually, in terms of pure soul strength consumption and replenishment, it wasn't hard to replenish it under the effect of the closed system large production line, even though the consumption of soul strength was enormous. What was truly troublesome was the amount of energy consumed during this period of time. It was truly immeasurable. Luo Nan didn't dare to forcefully do this sort of thing. He did his best to follow his normal routine and eat the breakfast and lunch that Rui Wen sent over. He took a short nap before sending the last box of ammunition and consumables away. It was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Luo Nan only gasped for breath before opening up the electronic map. He set it to a 3-dimensional panoramic mode and studied the schedule for this afternoon. He suddenly felt something in his heart when he was pondering with a frown. He turned his head and saw Ruiwen, who had been resting here in the afternoon. She stood quietly to the side, concentrating on looking at the map. The plump Jerry was squatting on her shoulder in a rare moment of honesty, his long tail wagging back and forth. Luonan laughed. What curious about that side? He never hid anything from Ruiwen, and he was very confident in Ruiwen's ability to keep secrets. This was a tacit understanding between the two. Of course, Luonan also admitted that his plan wouldn't have succeeded without Ruiwen's participation. Ruiwen turned her head and asked softly, "Should I go too?" It was quite rare for this little girl to open her mouth and speak. Though Luonan's mind was full of thoughts, his mood relaxed quite a bit. He laughed even more happily. "You can go if you want, but today is Friday. It's still school time. You didn't go." How could a child speak such big truths? Luonan was a bit embarrassed. Though he wasn't a good student in the past, he was still a well-behaved child. He went to school on time, did experiments and stayed up late at night. But now he had waded into the muddy waters of the inner world. He was faced with life and death struggles, blades and swords, and the pressure of time and tide waiting for no man. The school curriculum could only be chuckled in comparison. Well, wasn't this a bad example for Ruiwen? Luonan hadn't considered such matters before, but ever since he had that conversation with Emoya that night, a corresponding sense of responsibility had awakened. He felt a mountain of pressure for a time. Ruiwen, it's like this. We students need to study properly and make progress every day. This is a critical period and I have no choice but to do this. After this matter is settled, I will definitely study hard. Otherwise, how can I, cough? Luonan had forcefully swallowed back the words, get a Fuan society. It suddenly occurred to him that not only was this cliché meaningless, but it was also an extremely crude lie to members of the inner world like them. Although Ruiwen was autistic, she was very smart. Luonan had always believed that. Luonan was stumped for 2 seconds before forcefully changing the direction. What I'm trying to say is that the experiences at school are extremely precious and important. They are an indispensable part of our entire lives. Luo wen yi tu luo li lud tu shi tu he tu. It was also at this moment that the way of thinking that he had developed over the years automatically helped him shift onto the right track. My grandfather, and of course your grandfather, the one we visited at the sanatorium last weekend. In his formatting theory, there is a section on student related to the social format. You can imagine how important it is. For now, you just need to remember. Only by fully observing and delving into the present environment from home to school to society, can you have your own experiences. Only then will you be able to form a complete personality. This is what distinguishes us from other people. This is the basis for normal communication. This is the foundation for establishing oneself. Wasn't what he said a bit deep? Ruiwen asked him right as Luonan was pondering, is my personality incomplete? Ruiwen gazed at him. My memory is very short. My experiences are very few. I'm different from other people. In that case, my personality would be incomplete. How can you say that? Luonan retorted in a loud voice in the first instant. But then he was stuck once more. Ruiwen's deduced conclusion wasn't wrong. This was already the confirmed conclusion of the branch's laboratory. But he couldn't admit it no matter what. Luonan hadn't sweated as much as he did right now, even though he had toiled for an entire morning to transport a 1-ton item 2,000 kilometers away. At this moment he just wanted to kidnap a child psychologist to use as a reference. Ruiwen was still gazing at him. Luonan had always felt that those gloomy eyes shouldn't belong to a child. They were so deep and unfathomable. But now that he thought about it again, it might be more accurate to describe them as emptiness. Ruiwen still couldn't find her own position. Did she still think of herself as a crow? Luonan's heart felt even more stuffy. He wanted to give himself a slap. This mouth. Oh, this IQ. Actually, the one with an incomplete personality should be him, right? But suddenly, a light flashed in Luonan's mind. He didn't think too deeply and just blurted out that it's very normal to have an incomplete personality. I'm not perfect right now either. This is because we're still children. We haven't reached adulthood yet. But our personalities are always developing. In terms of knowledge, in terms of learning, in terms of interpersonal relationships, the more we observe, the more we interact, the more we deal with. Only then will we be endlessly perfected. Luonan didn't know whether or not this was considered consolation, but he decided to keep Ruiwen company. He wanted to let her know that she wasn't a lonely and alienated person in this world. It's not a problem if my memory is missing. I remember everything I did before I was 10 years old. After that, it was all experiments. 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 Just thinking about it makes me regret it. Luonan was basically speaking without thinking. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to stop himself. He rushed to make a conclusion. So we need to make up for our lessons right now. Not only do we need to make up for our lessons in knowledge, we also need to make up for our lessons in interpersonal relationships. It hasn't been long since you joined the class. You need to pay attention to building a good relationship with your classmates. Okay, it's fine to be an invisible person, but you need to pay attention to your observations. Skipping classes is also a type of experience, but it's still too radical. Ruiwen blinked her eyes. This small movement removed a bit of the oppressive feeling from her gaze. It gave her a bit of a cute flavor. Ruiwen had already begun to grow her hair out under the strong request of Mrs. Luo Shuqing and teacher Emoya. She had accumulated 2 months of sleep and had been styled by a famous designer. She had a cool androgynous style, but she had also softened the contours of her facial features. According to Emoya, a professional, it had the effect of killing both men and women. Luonan was a bit convinced now, but he didn't dare to relax. He continued to do his best to convince her. You'll be teaching in small classes at the middle school level. You'll be able to see who you're missing with a single glance. When the time comes, teacher will give aunt and uncle a call, and the two of us will have to eat the cake together. Come, act as a perfect cover for your brother. This way our relationship will be even firmer, and our family relations will be handled perfectly. In the end, Luonan still revealed his true intentions. He pushed Ruiwen outside. You'll first catch up to my progress in supplementary classes. Then we'll work hard together and supervise each other. We'll perfect each other's personalities. This is what a good brother and sister should be like. A good family. Luonan already didn't know what nonsense he was babbling about. Luckily, Ruiwen was very obedient. She basically wouldn't refuse Luonan's arrangements. She was pushed into the elevator by Luonan just like that. Oh right. You don't need to deliver food tonight. I'm busy. Luonan finally let out a long breath as he watched Ruiwen ride the elevator up. He turned his head to look at the empty laboratory area. He still had a lingering fear. He made a firm resolution. He would definitely ask He Yuan to help him find a senior psychologist to seriously solve the problem Ruiwen was currently facing. He did what he said. He deliberated over his words for a bit and left a message for He Yuan on the psychic wave network. She was probably still busy. She didn't immediately respond. Luonan didn't wait any longer. He composed himself and walked back to the laboratory area to deal with some loose ends. Everything was in order half an hour later. He followed his predetermined plan and walked to the lounge. He activated the completely sealed simulation chamber that he had specially purchased. Luonan was able to truly calm his mind within the tight and sealed environment of the chamber. His mind flowed along the soul cloak that practically surrounded the earth. He followed the predetermined coordinates to a reference object, and with a large leap he arrived at an area 2,000 kilometers away. This was a dry cave located within a mountain. The temperature was maintained at around 40 degrees. It was originally just a relatively large rock crevice. Later, Mo Luan, who was stationed here, forcefully carved out a hidden space to serve as a forward operating base. Mo Luan sat cross-legged in a corner of the forward operating base right now. A maintenance robot was busy at work. The various module parts that had been sent over had already been assembled and replaced on the simple and crude workbench. The maintenance work had already been completed. Right now, only a few minor details were being handled. The electromagnetic Vanguard one was undoubtedly on the workbench. Its overall appearance was similar to that of the exoskeleton-clad military police. If a professional familiar with military equipment were to look at it, it would be very easy to discover that this was actually a standard NCO X-2 humanoid robot platform. This type of robot was actually quite rare in the military. Its practicality wasn't high, but it suited Luonan's needs very well. He borrowed the existing platform to carry out modifications and processing. After a few days of running in, the external appearance was more or less the same, but the most fundamental operating mechanism was already completely different. Luo Nan adjusted himself to the most comfortable position in the simulation chamber. Let's begin now. Let's strive for 2.5 days to build the foundation. Luo Nan's consciousness was transferred to the divine binding hoop through the virtual brain system. He issued a clear command. Core mode implantation. At the same time as Luo Nan issued the command, the wraith sign shuttling through the clouds froze in another part of space and time. It was as if the wraith sign had become a world of its own. The flowing bloody light and lava above the towering structure of the Blood Soul Temple flowed even faster. There was only a single seed imprint within the 4th floor of the temple hall. It transformed into light under the pressure of this internalized force, piercing through the void once more. 1,000th of a second later, the seed imprint accurately pierced into the forward operating base inside the mountain. It hovered for a bit inside the room. Then, under Luo Nan's command, it was thrown into the anthropomorphic head armor of the electromagnetic Vanguard 1. There were large amounts of sensory instruments, auxiliary computing systems and so on integrated here. And within this space where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, there was a square piece of metal lying horizontally. It was the size of an infant's fist, and it tumbled back and forth under the effect of magnetic force. It was completely different from the other components of the instrument. The seed imprint was directly inserted into it. Chapter 595. Core Mode Implantation Initiating System Self-Check. Insufficient automatic core component, indicating power output of 3 bars. In the eye sockets of the fully enclosed helmet, the gathered electricity dimmed down again, leaving only 2 weak spots of light, like the residual heat of metal after high-temperature processing. Luo Nan obtained the latest test results from the virtual brain interface and the window of the divine binding hoop. To be honest, it wasn't very ideal. 3 boxes. As expected, I lost some of what I collected yesterday. Luo Nan was unable to understand the power units of the virtual brain system and the soul binding hoop. He found it troublesome to translate, so he simply displayed it in graphical mode. The graphical interface showed that 10 grids were full, and the current indicating power had reached 3 grids. There was still a gap of nearly half to the basic line of 5 grids to activate the battle machinery. Luo Nan wasn't surprised by this result. Didn't he come all this way for the sake of solving the problem? He continued to issue commands, and the virtual brain system smoothly connected to the spirit binding hoop and gave feedback. Manual activation of remote control mode. Initiating mental link. Synchronization rate 73%, 82%, 97%. Synchronization complete. Current delay, 0. 2 milliseconds. In this moment, Luo Nan's thick soul strength joined with the seed imprint that had just been transplanted into the electromagnetic Vanguard's head armor. A circle of electricity circulated and diffused, transforming into a brand new interference mode. The metal block that carried the seed imprint also became very stable. It no longer rolled randomly and formed a certain rotation pattern. In the hollow eye sockets of electromagnetic Vanguard 1, electric sparks flickered once more. Very soon its control system was fully activated. The energy, transmission, perception and other modules were connected one by one, allowing this combat machine to continuously turn its head, swing its arms and bend and extend its arms. Then like a normal person it lightly jumped off the workbench. Luo Nan lay quietly within the simulation chamber, but his mental plane was extremely active. It was he who possessed the electromagnetic Vanguard number 1 and performed all of the above actions. This was an expedient measure before the seed imprint took root and sprouted, but it was still an interesting experience. It was similar to the real-life version of Frost River reality. It was also an advanced version of remote mechanical control. Of course, there were even more wondrous places inside. Although the power of the seed imprint was low, it was not idle. It was still using a special method to observe all of this with clairvoyance. It was trying to coordinate and respond through Luo Nan. Luo Nan was controlling number 1, but he was also cooperating with number 1. They were together in the forward operating base. At this time, other than paying attention to the core components, Luo Nan was also inspecting the other components and the overall situation of the system. He was making fine adjustments according to specific problems. The maintenance robot that was specially sent over became the busiest one following number 1. Luo Nan didn't do these things himself. After all, his reserves of knowledge in this area weren't enough. In the underground laboratory of gear, The one responsible for the overall allocation of resources and basic operations was the military-grade AI, flag bearer. And in this forward operating base, the one carrying out the corresponding missions was the external neuron. This miraculous creation, whose origins were still unclear to this day, displayed an extraordinary level of intelligence. Its overwhelming control over Earth's technology was perfectly reflected here. After about 40 minutes of testing, the effectiveness of the electromagnetic vanguard system and the operation of the modules were basically in the normal range, and they had successfully passed the various traps created by the novice designer. As for the deeper problems, they could only be tested in practice. Right now it was already 3 in the afternoon. Luonan decided to leave the cave. Kopf set out. Number 1 headed outside. Concealment had already been taken into consideration when constructing the forward operating base. There were also some geological problems, so the passageway leading outside was rather winding. Many places were barely passable. This could also be considered a test of the electromagnetic vanguard's control. At first, this remote-controlled combat machine had some friction with the volcanic rocks on all sides. Occasionally, sparks would burst out. But soon, the sound of friction and scraping disappeared without a trace. This wasn't just because Luonan was used to controlling combat machines. This included the core seed imprint's grasp of the external environment. It quickly became sharp and reasonable. 2 minutes later, the electromagnetic vanguard number 1 passed through a stream of semi-solidified lava. Sunlight could already be seen shining down ahead. This place was a time zone away from Xia City. It was roughly around 2 in the afternoon. Even though the weather wasn't good, there was still dusky sunlight shining down. There was the exit. Number 1 slid down again. The dust from the magnetic levitation's recoil was still swirling. The foul air within the narrow and cramped passageway began to stir restlessly. An unforeseen event had occurred. A 4-legged short-tailed, scaled monster leaped out from the stream of semi-solidified lava that number 1 had just passed through. It displayed outstanding explosive power. The faint sound of tumbling lava could be heard. Its sharp blade-like tongue had already pierced through the connection between number 1's armor and helmet. But at this moment, crackling electric flames leaped up from number 1's all-metal body. The air hummed and vibrated, so much so that the surrounding bumpy rock strata trembled and cracked. A short hissing sound came from the scaled monster's throat. This fellow didn't even have time to spit out corrosive venom from its tongue before number 1's magnetic field suddenly expanded outwards. It lost its target and direction in a muddle-headed manner, flinging itself over number 1's shoulder. Number 1's limbs didn't move. The direction of the electric field's intensity instantly changed. It formed a powerful blade-like arc of electricity that directly bombarded the scaled monster's body. Under the high pressure, the scaled monster was instantly turned into charcoal. Number 1's gliding speed didn't even change after this counterattack. It continued to move toward the area illuminated by the dusky sunlight. As it passed by the scaled monster's corpse, the severely deformed charred corpse burst into flames with a bang. The flames were slightly red and a bit dark. The color of the light was like a layer of tainted blood. But the flames were truly vicious. The scaled monster, which was the length of an adult's arm, was burned to ashes in a short half a second. Only the flames that exploded at the last moment seemed to be affected by the electromagnetic field. The flames chased after number 1's figure, circling around it like a spirit snake. Only then did they extinguish. When the flames were extinguished, the orderly rotating metal cube in number 1's head cavity glowed a bit red. Then it returned to its original state. Luonan shot a glance at the window of the god-binding hoop. He saw that the 4-grid power meter had no reaction at all. He couldn't help but shake his head. The conversion rate was simply inhumanly low. Not to mention the problem of energy dissipation and loss before a qualitative change was formed. Luonan's resolve to complete his plan grew firmer. Number 1 faced the direction of the sunlight at this time. It charged upward, arriving above the mountain where the forward operating base was located. Luonan's vision and the senses of the combat machinery's instruments were effectively combined. They were separated into layers, spreading out layer by layer. In this place there was no feeling of looking down on all the mountains. This volcanic area was overflowing with the smell of sulfur. Not a blade of grass grew in this place. In fact, it was formed from several hundred large and small hills. Every hill could be considered a volcanic crater. Their average height was no more than 200 to 300 meters. Right now most of them were still emitting flames and smoke. It was as if they could erupt at any time. Oh, it's erupting. Over a dozen kilometers away, a mountaintop suddenly spewed out large amounts of steam. It surged up nearly 100 meters. The surface of the ground seemed to have turned into a viscous mud. It surged and undulated endlessly. There were also enormous bulges that protruded and cracked. Sparks flew chaotically. The cycle repeated itself, and the inner layer faintly emitted the dark red glow of lava. This was a scene that could never be seen in Xia City. The volcanic area where electromagnetic Vanguard No. 1 was located nearly 2,000 kilometers southwest of Xia City. It was already close to the western side of the Indochina Peninsula. It was an area where the Eurasian Plate and the Indian Ocean Plate collided. Intense volcanic activity had occurred in the geologic era. And after the start of the Third World War and the arrival of the Age of Distortion, this area was razed to the ground in the most chaotic era. The flames of war and the wanton use of weapons of mass destruction turned this area into scorched earth. And in the process of reconstruction after the war, this area was naturally excluded from the scope of large metropolitan areas due to its poor geographical location. The closest large metropolis to this area was Spring City. It contrasted well with Xia City, and the two were indeed sister cities. Spring City was nearly 500 kilometers away from this area. It couldn't be said to be far, but it was definitely not an area of effective control. In fact, whether it was in the secular society or the inner world, this volcanic area could be considered a taboo. This was because 3 years ago this place was still a battlefield where extraordinaries bombarded each other. Back then this volcanic area was the center. Within a range of 2,000 square kilometers, the heavens collapsed and the earth split. It was completely changed beyond recognition. The force of the impact even pierced through the earth's crust, detonating the group of volcanoes underground. It turned the already devastated volcanic area into its current state. Luo Nan knew of one of the extraordinaries who participated in this battle. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu's RT-8313 mission post on headquarters website. It was Mr. Jin Buhuan, the one who hinted that he wanted to act like a rogue against the Empress Wu. Not long after this message was posted, this successful extraordinary businessman engaged in a spectacular battle here. Then he disappeared from everyone's line of sight. Jin Buhuan's disappearance caused a sensation back in the day. It was in no way inferior to the death, of Jin Tong in the outer seas of Xia City. It was just that on the night of the 14th, Luo Nan had used the divine binding hoop to indirectly confirm Jin Tong's death. And Jin Buhuan's life and death had always been a mystery. A year or two after the battle, this place was still a hot area for ability users to explore and excavate. But now it was much more deserted. At the very least, Luo Nan didn't see a single existence other than the various mutant life forms that were always active on the ground and within the lava. This included ability users, normal people, and even the rumored vagabonds of the wilderness. Chapter 596. The ring-shaped drone somersaulted back and forth within the steam cloud. No matter how miserable it was, it persisted and remained the same. It displayed its extreme stubbornness. After going back and forth a few times, Luo Nan had a general understanding. This should be some kind of field sampling work. From the direction of the electromagnetic waves, the operator was several hundred kilometers away. Perhaps they were still in Spring City. This was a relatively safe method of scientific research. Luo Nan didn't really care. Of course, he didn't want others to pay attention to his actions and cause unnecessary interference. So he controlled the combat robot to go down from the side of the hill, avoiding any possible surveillance cameras or radar. Those things were still a bit of a hindrance, but the place Luo Nan wanted to go was still quite far. A small detour was nothing. Luo Nan made a detour from the side of the hill. The drone in the sky completed another roll and shuttle within the steam cloud. This time it swayed and shot out a net-like object. It seemed to encircle some matter that was ejected from the crater of the volcano. Then it turned around and left. The sampling was successful. Luo Nan's mental senses focused a bit. He saw that there were 2 or 3 1-centimeter-long fiery red ants encircled within the specially made fine net. These fellows could be considered large among their species. They were struggling fiercely, but they didn't have many methods to deal with the specially made bug net. The ring-shaped drone accelerated in a straight line, quickly distancing itself from the steam cloud. Clearly, its target here was undoubtedly these ants. The source of interference was gone. 2,000 kilometers away, Luo Nan frowned from within the simulation pod. What a coincidence. The other party was also interested in the Vulcan ants? Oh, this wasn't strange at all. After all, the Vulcan ants were the star mutant species of this volcanic area. They represented a typical mutant species ecology. They had been very popular in recent years. Many research dogs were counting on them to publish papers and graduate. Just take a sample and go back for analysis. It's best if we don't meet again. It was impossible for Luo Nan to make the volcanic area his private hunting ground. With the current level of technological advancement, there would be satellite imaging even if there were no drones. Playing with a single drone was just a dream. He could only eliminate the interference as much as possible. Luo Nan suddenly discovered that the speed of the drone, which was already far away in the horizon, had suddenly slowed down while he was pondering. It swayed back and forth. In the end, it was unable to advance any further. It slowly descended. It seemed that there was a malfunction. Luo Nan's mental senses kept track of it from beginning to end. He saw the struggling appearance of the machine, and he could imagine the unwillingness of the remote controller several hundred kilometers away. It has nothing to do with me. Luo Nan decided to temporarily lower his moral level and ignore the situation over there. He wanted to complete his own plan earlier and calm his mind earlier. The target area of Luo Nan's plan was located 140 kilometers away. The target was over there. The forward operating base was over here. The distance between the two was quite far. It wasn't that Luo Nan was looking for trouble for himself. It was just that the most famous manic zone of the volcanic area was not far away from the forward operating base. Not far from a rather inconspicuous dividing line towards the southwest. In this desolate area that was covered in volcanic ash and lava, piles of bones of different colors appeared. There were even corpses that had not been completely devoured and completely corroded. Not to mention the corpses of the animals. Just by looking at the bones alone, one would be able to see the bones. They were also very strange. Gray, black, white, red, green and many other colors were mixed together. It was practically impossible to find two piles of bones that were more or less the same. Luo Nan crossed the dividing line and went 2 to 3 kilometers in. Finally, a living creature appeared before his eyes. It was a skinny and bony canine creature. Calling it a canine was only a rough estimation based on its outer appearance. The half-rotten fur on its body, as well as its abnormally swollen head and some of its limbs and joints, had already caused this fellow to be severely deformed. It was very hard to distinguish it in detail. Anyone who saw this sort of situation would think that this fellow could fall to the ground at any moment. But when the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 entered the territory of this canine creature, a strangely sharp howl came from its throat. Its four limbs exerted force at the same time, and it charged towards the Vanguard 1 like an artillery shell. The half-rotten wounds on the canine creature's body spurted out turbid liquid at practically the same time due to the excessive force exertion. There were even some impurities mixed within. The liquid exploded and dispersed in the instant it left its body. It was as if it brought forth a dark gray and green cloud. Plague Hound. Luo Nan silently recited the name he had given to this canine creature. As for the more authoritative scientific name, there was no need for that. The electromagnetic Vanguard 1's left arm bent and rose up. The built-in Gauss rifle module sprayed a standard bullet out of the muzzle at high speed under the effect of a powerful electric field. The Plague Hound was still 10 meters away from the Vanguard 1 when the bullet pierced its skull. The enormous kinetic impact caused its entire head and the thick front half of its body to be smashed into smithereens. The exploded limbs and flesh were still in midair when they were scorched by the leaping electric fire. They transformed into strands of green smoke that dissipated into the air. This was certainly not the result that could be achieved with a purely kinetic firearm. The other half of the corpse could be seen to be like the scaly monster in the rock crevice. It was rapidly burned to nothing within the blood-colored flames. Crisp crackling sounds rang from within the flesh and blood of the corpse as it burned. Several dozen 1-centimeter-long fiery red ants attempted to charge out from the flames, but in the end, they were turned to ashes one after another. These ants were exactly the same as the samples captured by the crashed unmanned drone. They were the star mutants of this volcanic area. Vulcan ants. The parasitic state is becoming more and more unstable. According to the research data, this nest of Vulcan ants has reached the time for a new generation. At this time, the ant colony's control is at its weakest, but the queen's combat strength is at its strongest. Excellent. The stronger the better. The current scouting network Luonan was using was his mental senses and the AI, Vanguard 1's intelligent sensing module, which was constructed together. The layers were rich and they complemented each other. He soon confirmed that the manic mutants under the parasitic control of the Vulcan ants had received abnormal stimulation from this direction. They had temporarily stopped hunting and killing each other. With a shake of their bodies, they had transformed into loyal and devoted guardians. They swarmed in his direction. This was the result Luonan hoped to achieve. Therefore, the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 did not dodge or evade under his control. It continued to advance toward the target area 100 kilometers away according to the previously set route. However, it had only taken a few steps when the Gauss rifle module, which had just achieved success, lifted up once more. The bullet hummed and rumbled as it fired. It struck a perfectly straight diagonal line within the dusky smoke and dust. It accurately struck a large eagle with its wings spread and circling 2 kilometers away. It was nearly 700 meters in the air. The outcome was more or less the same as that of the plague dog. The large eagle was instantly blasted into smithereens. However, what shot out wasn't flesh and blood, but precise mechanical parts. The lightning in Vanguard 1's eye sockets extinguished twice, and Luonan retracted his words. Chapter 597. This unforeseen event did not affect Luonan's determination to carry out his plan. He checked his energy reserves one last time and confirmed that he could complete a one-way charge under the intense killing. Then he controlled the combat machine to take large strides and attack in a straight line. At the same time, black smoke that was near nothingness flowed through the gaps between the rock and soil. It was Luon moving stealthily underground. With Luonan drawing its attention, it effectively avoided the eyes and ears of the vast majority of the defenders. It rapidly approached the target area. And at this time, from the perspective of the electromagnetic Vanguard number 1, it could faintly see an unceasingly approaching gray line ahead. It was a skirmish line formed by several dozen mutants similar to plague dogs. This was just a small unit. Behind this skirmish line, on the two flanks and even behind the electromagnetic Vanguard number 1, there were already threats accumulating. The mutants under the control of the Vulcan ants are manifesting more and more clearly in terms of organization and sociality. The conclusion of a certain summary flashed through Luonan's mind. It echoed with this phenomenon, but it did not leave a trace in Luonan's mind. He still controlled the Gauss rifle module to a single-shot state. He did not seek to block the mutants' assault momentum. He just followed the most precise and efficient method to kill them one by one. This feeling was quite familiar. It was like playing a more realistic Frost River reality game. But what was different from the game was that every time he made a move, the metal block within his head armor would always transmit sets of electrical signals. These were the transliterations of the seed imprint's various judgment reactions. These signals gave the combat machine's computing system a set of judgment options, and they were directly used on Luonan's mental plane. They gave him a highly optimized reference plan. As an extraordinary, or more accurately speaking as the wilderness hunter Jin Tong, how would he react when faced with this kind of ever-changing situation? The hissing sound of wind brushed in from the flank. A long ochre-red snake, nearly the same color as the surrounding volcanic rocks, leaped up from the ground with its upper body. It clearly wanted to coil around the left arm module that spat out death bullets. But what welcomed it was a blade light that came from an even trickier angle. The long ochre-red snake was cut in half by a single blade strike. The crackling electricity extinguished the life force of the parasitic Vulcan ant within its body at the same time. It was straightforward and efficient. At least 70% of the credit for this blade was due to the stress response of the seed imprint. Luonan was more like a guide. The feedback from the imprint of the Jin Tong seed grew stronger and stronger over the course of a few days. It grew faster and faster, giving Luonan quite good pointers and benefits. But this was not enough, far from enough. And that group of people didn't have enough, right? Number 1 fired another shot, shattering a rock a few hundred meters away. Apart from the shattered stone shards, parts of the rock exploded all over the place. That's enough. At the forward supply base of Spring City's western defense line, Meng Tu couldn't help but slap the table. In the wilderness, be it humans or machines, they are all fucking lawless. Hurry up, activate the next set of backup equipment. As a senior officer of the Coastal Defense Force, Meng Tu was assigned a mission to relieve his boredom. It was supposed to be a leisure job similar to traveling, but now it seemed that his unreliable boss was the one who pushed the blame to him. His heart was filled with irritation. He nearly wanted to rip off the chain of discipline, but his many years of military discipline made him suppress this impulse. His voice only grew a bit coarser. You still haven't found out the origins of this X2? If you want to investigate here, don't overlook the SCA's side. The officer next to him was the commander of this forward supply base, Major Guo. It was hard not to feel a bit awkward being overridden. But the disparity in military rank, the difference between the city defense force and the field army, and especially the distance between burners and normal people, made it impossible for him to say anything. He could only try to raise his presence. This X2 has clearly undergone major modifications. With such a degree of modification and the methods of those rats of the black market, it's unlikely that we'll be able to find anything. Perhaps we can consider it from the perspective of a highly destructive electromagnetic weapon. Meng Tu shook his head. It's not a simple electromagnetic weapon. That's right. Its modifications are very extreme. I'm saying that it's not just an electromagnetic weapon. Have you ever seen an electromagnetic rifle that can blast apart a mutant with a body of steel in one shot? Perhaps it uses special ammunition. If the density and weight of the ammunition exceeds. But there's no way to explain the intense combustion in the latter half. Speaking of which, Major Guo, the deep blue walkers in Spring City don't have a high conversion rate. Yes. Then I suggest that you find an opportunity to attend a short-term training class in the near future and gain a deeper understanding of the combat methods of the deep blue walkers. It had to be said that Meng Tu wasn't Major Guo's direct superior. This statement sounded extremely harsh, but Major Guo had a good temper. At the very least, he didn't show any anger on the surface. He even humbly asked for guidance. What Senior Colonel Meng means is that this modification is somewhat similar to the deep blue walkers. It's not a modification. It's a technique. This kind of enchantment technique can pour the special power of the format of fire into the ammunition of firearms. I really like using this move, but it's very difficult to accomplish alone. In order to achieve this, one must have extremely high attainments in the field of formatting. Among the people I know, Major General Tianbang is one of them. There's also that person from the He family. Meng Tu shook his head. You've digressed. What I mean is that this isn't just a matter of military equipment modification. It involves extraordinary power. It's not the format of fire, but an extraordinary power of electromagnetism. But this is clearly a robot. In the current world, all kinds of demons and ghosts have appeared. At this point, he turned his head to ask the intelligence officer beside him. I asked you to look for a match with the SCA. Have there been any results? The intelligence officer handed over a flexible screen. On it was a list that had just been pulled out. Meng Tu received it, swept his eyes over it, and spat. Is the SCA waiting for the new year? Even that damn Jin Tong can be listed first. Meng Tu looked at the list and couldn't find anything. But because of Jin Tong, he thought of that even more troublesome fellow. His heart grew increasingly irritated and he slammed the table once more. It was at this time that the adjutant came over to inform him. There's a long-distance meeting at command in 5 minutes. It requires you, Professor Wu and Professor Ding to participate. The meeting place is in the base's 4th conference room. Meeting all day long. Meng Tu threw the flexible screen on the table and stormed out. Inside the room, Major Guo shrugged his shoulders. He was about to relax his posture when he saw Meng Tu turn around and return. Once the backup surveillance is activated, immediately synchronize the relevant footage to my place. Major Guo reflexively stood at attention. Understood. Only then did Meng Tu leave. It took him a minute to reach the 4th conference room. He had just sat down, and before he even had a drink of water to calm himself down, 2 gray-haired old men came over together. He stood up and greeted them. Professor Wu, Professor Ding. Professor Wu Zunliang, who was in his 90s, still had a ruddy complexion. Even after nearly a month in the wilderness, his voice hadn't lowered at all. When he saw Meng Tu, he asked directly. The project team's sampling equipment went out of control, and there was a combat robot at the scene of the incident. Did you send it there? Can you guarantee that the sampling results will be back by today? Helpless, Meng Tu could only explain, we're still verifying the situation at the scene. Also, we haven't determined the origin of that combat robot. As he spoke, a signal came from Major Guo's side, synchronizing the footage collected by the third surveillance equipment. Meng Tu thought for a moment, then simply set it to projection mode and reported the situation to the two old professors. Before he could say more than 2 words, Wu Zunliang saw the NCOX-2 robot charging forward in a straight line on the projection. He couldn't help but slap the table. Holy sh**t. This is amazing, what a beautiful kill. Beside him, Professor Ding Jing, who was much more elegant and quiet, frowned. This will cause new variables to the aberrant ecology near the volcanic area, and the data that is currently being collected will be a mess again. Wu Zunliang scoffed at this statement. Aberrants are a mess to begin with. You're daydreaming if you want to do static research. Speaking of which, old Ding, your mindset should change. In the past, you worked on the ecosphere for research and protection, but now, do you still want to live together with these things? Screw you, you're the one living together. Hee, don't be fooled by our old Pan's wrinkled face. He's still cuter than these things. I've recorded this. Shall we play it for Sister Pan to hear later? Meng Tu could only sigh in his heart as the 2 leading ecobiologists bickered here. Fortunately, the remote conference soon began. Basically, it was still according to the established routine. They first reported the progress of all parties, then asked questions and found solutions. Meng Tu didn't turn off the projection. He was prepared to report the latest situation to the command center later. However, the main characters now were still the 2 old professors. There were meetings every day, but the problems wouldn't be refreshed every day. Professor Wu Zunliang turned around and interrogated the contact person. Right now, we've set up a grassroots team here in Spring City. Don't laugh, old Ding and I are both top-notch, and the students under us aren't idiots either. But right now, we don't even have the basic experimental conditions. Don't talk about the aberrant rebellion. I know that the wilderness laboratory here suffered heavy losses last year, but we can't just hole up in the supply base and do research, right? Do we make a round trip of nearly 1,000 kilometers every day just for the sake of parkour in the wilderness? The contact person coughed. Professor Wu, I was just about to report to you about the laboratory. We've already found a pretty good location with ready-made experimental sites and equipment. Before that, please allow me to introduce everyone to the project team's partner, Mr. Luo. At this moment, Professor Wu Zunliang noticed that there was an unfamiliar fellow who had been online the entire time but hadn't spoken. This person's face was rather thin, and the lines of muscle on his cheeks were rather heavy. He appeared rather stern and grave. Unlike the contact person who was used to speaking in a bureaucratic manner, this Mr. Luo wasn't one to beat around the bush. He went straight to the point. My company has a wilderness laboratory under its name. It was urgently closed during last year's riot and was isolated from the outside world. The damage it suffered wasn't that great. This laboratory is approximately 150 kilometers away from the target volcanic area. It's already a relatively forward position. Professor Ding. Wu Zunliang was a bit baffled. This Mr. Luo's way of addressing him was clearly different from the way old Ding beside him addressed him. Wu Zunliang was a straightforward person, and if there was a question he would ask, "You know me?" Mr. Luo laughed when he heard this. His originally stern face became rather warm and intimate at this moment. Professor Wu, I'm a graduate of Acumen College 77's Biological Sciences Department. I once wanted to take the exam to become your doctoral student. I went to visit you with senior sister Qingwen and even ate at your place. Bang. Wu Zunliang slapped the table in realization. I remember you. You and Qingwen were in the same orphanage. Later on you went with her to the wilderness. Before he even finished speaking, the remote communication screen began to shake incessantly. The conference room was only separated by a thread, but it also began to shake violently. The teacups on the table were knocked over with tinkling sounds. Meng Tu suddenly stood up and supported 2 old professors at the same time. He roared through the communicator.